Well, Mary and Rebecca, we're so honored to have you here, and we've all, for years, been the beneficiaries of the work, the love and labor that you've put into the work that has gone before our work, and we find ourselves in this circle owing so much to what you have provided in decades past. So to have you here, a chance to visit with you is a special treat for us, and welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a treat for me.
Me too.
I sent Rebecca and Mary a couple of short prompts to begin the conversation, but mostly I wanted this to be a time of exchange where the questions that are on your minds can have an audience with these two. So, is that enough of a start? Can you take the prompts that I sent and begin there? Mm-hmm. Great.
Although it's very hard to talk 10 minutes about anything in the hymnal,
Right.
in the hymnal field.
Understood.
He asked me to talk about the Yale hymnal because I think why did you ask me?
Because I've come to understand how influential the Yale hymnal has been in hymnody in North America in the 20th century.
It was for me, and I'm not sure that it was for many people around me.
Okay.
But it was very influential for me. I had grown up, half of my life was spent with the Mennonite hymnal of 1926, or 27. And with two very good editors, S.F. Kaufman and J.D. Brunk. They'd done a lot of work on the 1902 Old Mennonite hymnal. And then they worked on Life Songs. Life Songs #1 in 1916. And so they were ready to work on the 26th hymnal, but they were sort of hijacked. There was a group of men in the Mennonite church who came for another meeting there, and they got to talking about what kind of a hymnal this was going to be, and they were afraid of what was going to happen. And they decided and told I think by letter, told these two editors that they should have 150 songs with refrains. And that was because in the teens of last century, there was quite a movement toward the gospel song. It was later than most churches, but it was a movement then. And they felt that it must be there. Well, the hymnal was to be published the next year, and or at least printed. And they were very upset by it, but they agreed to do it. And they changed. They took out things they thought the Mennonite church ought to have, and we have these 150 songs with refrains. Mm-hmm. It was the kind of thing that it's very, very upsetting to the people that are treated that way. You won't be treated that way, I'm sure. And we weren't in '69. But the man who had been present there was always worried that somebody would do that to us. And we kept assuring him that it wouldn't happen. In my old age, I have to look at my notes and see what I was going to say. But I've used that hymnal. I used that hymnal for half of my life. And I never related the hymnal to my graduate work. And when I was almost finished with my degree, my doctorate in cello, somebody told, it was a Mennonite from Newton, who told me that there was this new hymnal. And she thought it was very good. And I was so delighted with it. I think it was so encouraging to see a hymnal that was somehow related to what I was doing in my doctoral work. And I'd never made a relationship like that before. They were two different worlds. And they remained two different worlds until that time. And I began to notice for instance, when I was studying cello literature, it was important to me what else was going on when a given work was written, and how it influenced that work. Well, I hadn't thought about that in terms of the hymnal. I mean, it was a real lack, but we didn't connect, especially if you were an instrumentalist in the Mennonite Church, you didn't connect instruments with the church particularly. It was outside of the church, but it was a wonderful thing to have that. And as I look at it now, I wonder why it was so exciting, because it was narrow. It was very good, but quite narrow. And although it was done by Yale University, it had mostly English things, and if it went across to the continent, it included a number of them too. But there was nothing that went to countries that we're now very concerned about including. But I began to relate my cello work and the kind of well, you all know what graduate work is like. You go deeply into the subject, and I began to realize that I could go deeply into the subject of hymnody too, and which I did then in the '60s, which was a great decade for hymnody. But I did it in Scotland with Eric Rowley, who had written more than anybody else probably at that particular time.
Did Routley have any influence on the Yale hymnal? Are you aware
I
of
doubt
that?
it. I doubt it. He would not have welcomed something American quite that quickly. Oh, he was very gracious, but also very British. And,
So his areas of research weren't crossing over yet in that way, in the way that the Yale book represents.
well, he was the kind who had a pitch sight memory. He could remember the page number. If I'd ask him about some composer, well, look at this page in this book. I mean, it was that kind of thing.
Yeah, okay.
He knew and remembered what he saw. But as I was working on I mean, it was a great help, because being a cellist in the Mennonite Church in those days was not great. I mean, how can you be a Christian and also play the cello? Was a question I got. But I began to see hymns, the relationship between a given hymn and the things that were going on in the world besides hymnody. What was happening? When were the wars, and what difference did that make? And there was an opening that I found very exciting. I didn't know then that I'd be working on a hymnal, but it led to my interest in that. And I must say, it's working on a hymnal is one of the most interesting things you'll ever do in your life. And
In more ways than one.
yes, positive and negative. But it's a great thing. So, but I made a relationship between hymnology, the study of hymns, and the study of cello. The thing that I found most unusual, this is to be a very brief talk, so I'll make it very brief. Here, already I've talked. Don't time here.
We're not keeping track.
Instead of the indexes at the back, they're at the front. And that's very confusing. But then here are some responsive readings, and then 50 pages of notes on the hymns.
Yeah.
And I thought I'd read to you one. I'm not going to read all the German names of the German books, but I'll tell you about what's there. But it's about 7 lines, and that's pretty typical of what went on here. Every hymn is introduced, and it has C references. And so you look back, if you count all the C references, it gets pretty long. And I'm not going to read those, but I want you to see what it's like. For now, thank we all our God. This hymn probably appeared first in a work, hymnal compiled by Martin Rinkart, 1586, 1649, and that began to have more meaning. Then I could think about what was going on in painting and music at a given time and how it might have influenced the person. Rinckart was a German Lutheran pastor at Eilenburg, where he suffered severe hardships during the 30 Years' War. And of course, that could go on for quite some time. You could read a lot about that in a dictionary. When it was published a few years later in Kruger's book by Kruger, it was set to Kruger's own tune, Nun danket alle Gott, an association that has endured. See number 25. The version used here is taken from Mendelssohn's cantata Lobgesang, 1840, discussed at number 50. Catherine Winkworth's translation is from her work, 1858, see number 10. So by the time you get the C references, you've read quite a bit about it. And so in 50 pages, I found this very exciting. In 15 pages, it gave you all kinds of hints of where you might go. And that's what happened when I had a sabbatical, and I could do that when I was working on the Mennonite hymnal. The one thing, I would not recommend this book, it didn't have any key signatures, because you had to figure it out yourself, and not every person in the pews is going to do that. And the reason was, in Calvin's initial writings, in his musicians' writings, there was a dot that could have been a rest, and they would have treated that as another beat. And the same thing with the fermata in the German things. That was treated, and so you'd have 5 beats in a measure, and then 4, and so on. But I found, see, we waited 40 years before we got a new book, and that's a long time. And so we bought this, the Yale hymnal for the College Mennonite Church. And I had the first choir there. Choirs were wrong. But we sat up in the balcony where nobody could see, and we would try to introduce the hymns in here before. That was the function of the choir, introducing.
What year would that have been introduced at College Mennonite?
That would have been between 58 and 62. And we found this book very good. And I used it I taught at Kenyatta University in Kenya. And they didn't have any books, and they were always stolen. And so I had them send over books. And it turned out to be just the right thing. I did it because I couldn't think of anything else. But the Kenyans knew British songs. There were a lot of British songs here, so it was one of the best things of my teaching there. Well, that's enough to say about it. The reason I liked it is because at the time, it increased my understanding of what a hymn could be. A hymn could also be part of the world of exploring and understanding.
Thank you.
I have a question for you. For the 67 book, or 69 book, wrong, 27, 69, anyway, there was much more careful attention to make sure that composers and authors were identified. Did the Yale hymnal have any influence, not only in your thinking, but on the thinking of the committee, to really be persistent in providing that kind of information? Or was that already accepted by that point? And
I think it was pretty well accepted. And it was my work at Edinburgh. Made me so convinced we ought to know. We ought to make clear where things come from and when. And Rowley knew it. It was just in his head, but I found the books.
So it's interesting that The UCC book that came out in whatever year it did.
96?
Yeah, there we go. They rather than put them all in the back, they put them on often for each page. And the New Presbyterian Hymnal has done
The
that as well.
Presbyterian.
Is that kind of information at the bottom of almost every one
Yes.
of the pages.
And
So-
they're by Carl Dahl, which
Yeah.
means that they were well done.
Yeah, so it just remains interesting to me that this continued drive to know more about where do these things come from. They have a history. There is a serious discipline around this
Well,
work.
And Carl Dawes also relate to the congregation perhaps that's going to use it. It has a lot of good things for old people. I'm noticing those. And wonderful things for old people. And there is a good relationship between what is said there and what old people need right now.
Yeah, so it's got a
And-
pastoral quality in
Yes,
some ways,
yes.
yeah.
Thank you.
So it's another interesting kind of dimension, I think, too, in this development, so.
That's enough I've said about this.
Thank you.
I forget what the other prompt was that you sent to me.
I can, well, I was talking about folk music, folk sources, and how they find their way to the page. Whether they're are there examples that are transcribed by committee from oral memory, or are they always sourced somewhere? Can you talk a little bit about some, maybe even some specific examples of how you've come by sourcing
Yeah.
folk tunes?
For the 92 book, we were deeply dependent on the work of Mennonite World Conference and deeply dependent on other denominations, the United Methodists, for example, and the Presbyterians, who had been collecting over a long period of time. So we did not, in 92, we did not have either the resources or other wherewithal to go after more a variety of ways in which a song might be interpreted. The one kind of folk, if you will, in that way that's from an oral tradition is the setting of the Loeb song that you had helped, I mean, you had also over the years helped
Yes.
you're aware of and find how different Amish communities have notated that with different notation styles. And we chose the one for the 92 book that was actually the most accessible, I think. I don't know that it's the most commonly sung, but it was the most accessible to see what it would look like on a page for non-Amish people to sing. So how to get it to the page? Yeah, that's a perennial question, isn't it? And I would say not only for folk, things that we consider to be folk traditions, but even those that might seem more standard, if you will. I mean, what are the variety of ways that you could notate Lift Every Voice and Sing? What are the variety of ways that you could notate how to sing a gospel song in a black gospel style? And yeah, so I think those are really challenging questions. And of course, Alice Parker has written and spoken on that way more than I would have. But in terms of the history of where that came from for the 92 book, we were deeply dependent on what other people had done. And in that way, to get back to Emily's dad's concern yesterday, was we had to go with what we had. We didn't know the people groups. They had usually been identified as this is from this country or this is from that country, and not as much this is this people group, this is this people group. So my encouragement for you to know that that's an area of helpful growth, I think. What group of people is actually singing this, not just what geopolitical location do they have.
Let's take questions from the circle.
I'm interested in the connection between a hymnal and what's going on in the wider world.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes me want to ask, and not want to ask, in what way should we pay attention to to what is going on in our world right now. Of course, I think of the U.S. election as we think about this hymnal, or song collection, sorry.
Do you have thoughts about that?
You go first.
Well, I
You're
think-
working on it more recently than I.
Yeah. There are a couple things I think come to my mind pretty much immediately. Is yes, those of us, at least in the U.S., we are in at least some of us are in the U.S., are in a different season than what we've been before. And part of the caution I find myself wanting to make often is not everyone is feeling the same way I do about this. So not everybody is as worried as I might be about this or that or something else. And some of those people are in the church. So how to think about what is it that the church might need to sing in this particular time? What are the varieties of ways and varieties of sounds and the varieties of themes or whatever that we need to sing in this time that for some of us is marked by kind of upheaval of some things. For some of us, it's a relief. So what is it that we are more deeply called to that goes beyond our political concerns? And then I think the other thing about that is that I'm going to risk here and say, I think North Americans in general, we have a tendency to think that our time is unique and it has never happened before. So,
This may be true, this particular election.
well, but really, has the church never been in a place where there has been political instability? Has the church never been in a place before where lots of people have been dislocated and whirling around? Has the church never been in a place before where there wasn't a kind of a political or prophetic or social voice to come forward? I think we have been. 30 years of war puts you in a kind of desperate place. And what is the kind of what's the hymn that's come down is now thank we all our God. So part of what I would hope is that this time that we're in is unique in a whole bunch of ways. But it is not unique as being the only time where the church has faced a whole bunch of other geopolitical, social, economic kind of concerns. So what from the past is also a resource for us in the present?
That's kind of what does the church need right now?
And the church changes so much
Yeah.
because the 606 question comes up. And that came at a time when we were getting together. The Mennonite churches were amalgamating. We did the hymnal, 69 hymnal with the General Conference Mennonites. It was a great experience that we joined with them. And now we're falling apart. Well, and out of it, on the first night when we introduced the song in Oregon at an Old Mennonite meeting, there was great joy. There was such a reaching out, and we were a fellowship of that was really quite special, and it carried on. But that song doesn't fit right now because we're falling apart. I mean, it's to some extent.
You were saying on the way over, you think, what's the Kyrie eleison that should become
Yes.
the church's song?
All right.
Or the Magnificat, or
Yeah.
I mean, there are a number of the direction is different anyway now.
Something we started talking about yesterday is the structure of hymnals and how much the table of contents and how it's organized shapes our experiences of the collection. I'm wondering if you could each say a little bit about how the structures of these two books came about and the choices involved in that process, and and sort of how, the thinking behind how to organize a collection.
I didn't hear quite all of it. You have to speak up with me. I'm getting old.
She's wanting to know how the organization of each of the books came about, the table of contents. So for the 1969 Mennonite hymnal, how did you
We
come
talked a
to
long
that?
time about that, and one can. And there was some idea that it would be good to have God's acts in history. That would be a way of organizing. We never got to it. And what we had to deal with was the fact that we were going to have a special section of gospel songs because that had worked so well in the 1940 book. The GC Mennonites had a difficult time with their 1927 book because it was too high church.
Yeah.
And so Lester Hustler made a series of books, of 6 books, including the gospel song. So you could tell whether, when you went to a church, what they sang, because those pages were dirty. or they were white. It was a very clearly divided in that way.
So in terms of then, so God's acts or different theological kind of
Yes, and we never got
things.
through with that. We finally put the gospel songs at the back of the book, and that made a section. But we took the usual way of starting with God, the Father, and
Jesus.
most churches were doing that at the time.
Yeah.
And but we had a kind of longing to do it some different way, and you did. You managed very well.
Maybe before I say a little bit more, the choral. So there was the gospel hymn section, and then there was the choral hymn section.
Yes.
Can you say a little bit about that? How did that come to be?
Yes, and 606 was there.
Yeah.
We thought people wouldn't be able to sing it, and the things in the choral section were special for choirs. But we couldn't call it choir because choir was a bad word. We called it the choral hymns of the time. And they were the hard ones.
Yeah.
It was just those 2 sections, really.
Yeah.
But I don't think we were quite happy with that.
Yeah.
And I think I recall there's also a hymns for children, right? Isn't there sections
Oh, yeah, there is
just
a
for children?
little section of it.
Which is, you know,
Oh, anybody else remember something that we did that I don't remember?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So with Hymnal, a worship book, we were divided in the same way that you are, only more people. So there was a music committee, there was a text committee, and a worship committee. And on these committees, there were 2 representatives from each denomination. So there was, and one of the people identified, say from the Mennonite Church, was a member of the Hymnal Council, and the other one from that denomination was part of the whole shebang that we called the Hymnal Forum. Okay, so, and these were the worker bees. Okay, so I came into the worship committee on this project as a worker bee, and then things evolved. But it was the worship committee that was given the responsibility to think through what the structure of the book would be, and that came forward. I don't know. It was about 1986, or it was within a year or two of actually the whole structure being in place and our working together. So we worked together and came up with 3 possibilities that we thought would be conceivable, and one was to use the same structure as the 1969 book, not having the gospel hymn section or the choral hymn section, because we had recognized how that became sort of socially dividing within the church. So to still have those songs represented, but put them under the topics where they made the most sense. Just a bracket here for a moment, is that the Church of the Brethren hymnal from 1951 they also had a gospel hymn section. They struggled also with gospel hymns in the ways that both Mennonite churches did. So again, there's a kind of unrest within the denominations about where this style of music from the late 19th century into the 20th century, where did it belong? And indeed, you could track what was the kind of theological orientation, the theological persuasions of congregations that used that section, which also had the dirty pages in it, that section, or there were other pages. Anyway, so that was one of the first choices. The second choice, it's not so much in terms of priority, but just for our conversation here, was one that tried to take the Anabaptist principle of discipleship and Jesus being at the center of our faith very seriously. So it was set up really, it was with songs that continued the unfolding of Jesus' life, death, ministry, and teaching. And that's what the book would have been structured with. Again, coming back to discipleship as being one of the orienting points. And then the third option was the one that actually came forward. And it was set up originally was just with the acts of worship as they are. Many of us who were involved with organizing, we were deeply persuaded by speech acts and speech act theory, where what you say actually makes something happen. It's doing the thing that you are talking about. And so it's quite evident, if you know what you're looking for, it's quite evident in the choices of verbs that are used, and also you can start looking down to see how that plays out with a number of the songs. It became kind of clear that there was a whole part of the church's life that didn't actually fit so neatly into that, and so it became the idea of this sort of faith journey kind of area. So it was a way to also work with faith formation, work with discipleship, but kind of imagined a little bit more in more deeply personal, more intimate kind of ways, and not necessarily in the sense of public worship. And of course, you know from using these things cross over, but it was a way of thinking about that. The hymnal council, the one that made the decision, they reviewed all three options and said, yeah, let's go with this one, but show us that this will work. And before the hymnal sampler that Mary put together, there was another very rough and ready little book that did not see the light of day for too many places. It was created basically for a conference of some sort, where the worship committee took a number of the hymns that were being in consideration and organized them among these ways. It was basically from gathering to sending. It was a matter to see, is there enough substance? Do we have enough, even with this a group of 100 or 150 songs that are clearly in contention, that we could actually organize it and put them in these kind of categories. And to our great relief, we found that basically that could be done without bending these categories all out of shape so that they became unrecognizable. Mary then used that with the hymnal sampler. That was another opportunity to see whether this structure would work, and then the book. We had 10 years to do all of this, you have 4, so you don't have the same kind of time to test some of these things and to get feedback on it. Is that helpful?
Can you talk about the durability of that structure?
Well, you heard yesterday from some of the students and is that, I mean, and young, I was surprised that these were younger students, actually, who found the structure actually very helpful in terms of finding things that are of similar sort, or this or that or something else, and feeling a sense of orientation. What I find in a seminary setting with people who are coming in who may have worshiped all of their lives is the structure of worship is just completely beyond them. They don't think in those kinds of ways. Somebody gathers song and they put this here and they put this here and then they have something else here, and the idea that there is a flow that a group can work through and move through is often a very revolutionary idea. So that as a kind of durability point for teaching purposes, for Christian formation purposes, I think it's still durable without having to use every single one every Sunday. And I think that was the point that people needed to be freed from, in the sense of saying you don't have to do every single one of these, but following a kind of basic order here moves you along. So, but its day may be over. So are you thinking, what are you thinking about in terms of different structures?
So we played with that question yesterday, and recognized that our sense is that there's, and I don't speak for everyone, but there's a broad sense, I think, that it has been very durable, and that reinventing something is not necessarily where we are feeling the need to put our energy and time.
Interesting.
Not that we would duplicate it, precisely, but.
So may I offer one of the things that in this time I would add, or maybe not add, but make sure is present and sounding, and that is a clearer sense of songs of lament.
We got that.
Yeah, good, because I mean, that is a speech act, and it is an action of worship, and to, in some way indicate how it's connected with some of these other things. I just think that's a major sense of awareness that has grown since the book came out, is the necessity of it. And
Especially now.
Well, I think in all time, frankly. I mean, I do. I mean, I think there may be certain kind of laments that are possible now, but that has really been an under-practiced part of the Christian tradition, at least in the world, in the areas where we have been.
The New Presbyterian has a lot of it.
Yeah.
And also a great deal more for older people.
Yeah.
I notice that.
Yeah.
Because I do a lot of singing with older people.
Yeah.
And it replaces what was songs about heaven. Wait till we get to heaven. Or, there are very few of those anymore, but it's how do you live when you're old?
Yeah. Yeah. What does faithfulness look like when life is really hard? When you're a point in your life where you are letting go of everything, and what does it take to be able to look into that time of letting go of everything? Yeah. In hope, though. Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of going back to the gospel hymns, gospel songs matter, I wonder to what extent you see the contemporary Christian music, worship and praise music, as being kind of that of our day, of this day. I mean, do you see it that way? And so in light of that, what do you think, or what's your counsel to us, or Mary, you especially at your age, how do you see the role of that body of music in the church today and going forward?
I haven't thought about it. But it's an interesting question. I don't think we talk about gospel songs anymore because they're so varied. I mean, there's a variety of modern songs that need new categories, which I'm not very good at.
Wouldn't you say I don't know if you've heard this criticism, but I've heard it several times about the 92 book, is that there are not enough blood hymns, which by and large are part of the gospel. I mean, it is the central theme of most gospel songs. And whether the fact that there are fewer gospel songs, or we don't talk about it as much as you say, has been because there are different understandings about the blood of Jesus and things like that. I don't know.
But we don't have the different representations of how you look at the blood.
Right, yeah. A number of years ago, I took on this very tedious task. Every now and then I just need a tedious task that I can focus on and just see where it goes. And I went through the back issues of Gospel Herald starting with about 1960 and working my way back till about 1930. And in all of this time, this is Gospel Herald. The Mennonite was in a different place. I did the same thing there. But what was interesting in the Gospel Herald in that 30-year period was, again, the church was wrestling with what is a gospel song, and particularly in light of the influence of, who was your predecessor at Goshen?
My predecessor?
Yeah.
In music?
Yeah, in congregational singing. He did songs for the church.
Oh, Walter Yoder.
Walter Yoder, and the kind of goal he had of lifting the musicality and the like of the church. So real clear commitments toward music. Didn't have a lot of space for gospel hymns. There were others who didn't have a lot of space for gospel hymns, but clearly it's a phenomenon in the church. Anyway, in this 30-year period, these articles would show up about gospel songs. And I was interested in how many of them you could have taken out the word gospel song and inserted contemporary worship music, and you could have reprinted the article. That the issues that were being fought about in the 30s to the 60s around gospel music were the things that already by the late 60s and early 70s are what's being said about contemporary worship music. So, in my opinion, is yes, it is, at least for some parts of it may be that that's the question for the constituency that you are most closely representing, perhaps, or most closely in contact with. Because there are other parts of the Mennonite Church that are not going to look at this book at all.
Right.
Because they have already made choices about where their musical home is. So how do you, that was the question even in the 92 book. How much of the contemporary things do we include in that book, knowing that it's going to get dated actually perhaps even a little more quickly than some other things will? You have now, 35 years of contemporary worship music, and some of the things that are durable are far more obvious, it seems to me, and worth really considering as part of this widespread music that is part of the North American church and the church around the world. In Korea, it is almost isn't it? Almost exclusively contemporary worship music? Mm-hmm. We have some people at College Mennonite who are from Indonesia, and it's really clear that contemporary worship music is their heart song. So it makes a really interesting, again, kind of intercultural question. That's my long answer to your question. I think it is, and
the starting point for this question is inclusive language, but it goes to a lot of different areas of our work together.
Love it.
To what extent did you see your work as moving the church to where you or a committee thought it should be versus reflecting the church that is?
you have 2 books that you can talk about for that.
I don't think we were looking to be leaders in the future.
For the 1969 book?
For the 69.
Yeah. There we go.
What kind of magic do we have?
You just have to move around. Yeah.
So more trying to represent what is.
Yes, I think that's what we were doing.
Not musically, though. I mean, you were moving things along musically.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, there were a number, yes, quite a few new things.
Yeah. And in terms of research, because this is one of the it is the most sophisticated Mennonite hymnal that had happened to that point. And it did set the standard for hymnals in other denominations otherwise. So in that way, wouldn't you say in some ways you were leading the church into a different knowledge, a different understanding about our hymns and songs?
Yeah, I just have never thought of it that
Yeah.
way. Thank you.
When you were working with the 1992 hymnal up and through the hymnal sampler, what would you say at that point? How would you characterize the work that we did? Were we leading the church, or do you think we were trying to represent the church where it was, or were we divided on that?
I think we were divided, but I think we were mostly wanting to be sure that they would be able to sing the ones that we had. That probably, first of all, which ones do we really want to carry on? And then a few new ones.
Yeah. In terms of the 92 book, we were divided. I mean, it became a point where the project nearly collapsed entirely. And inclusive language was not the only issue, but it was one that kept bringing to the surface different assumptions within our group about what we were doing, different assumptions of what it meant to represent the church, different assumptions about what it meant to pay attention to a historical tradition. I know that's redundant, but yeah, it really did nearly collapse. And I think that I would say that overall the pressure to lead the church came more from external sources that were looking around inclusive language in particular, looking for this group now to validate their political alliances, their political advocacies for things that anything short of a full and radical revision was going to be short on. And I would say that different ones of us within that project struggled with knowing how to represent different advocacies, because there were also advocates for keep it the way it is. This is how we've known this. This is what we don't change things at the level of inclusive language.
I felt that there was such an emphasis on it in inclusive languages at the expense of so many other aspects of hymnals.
Yeah, that was true certainly for a very significant period, and that was part of the pressure for you. That pressure became difficult to work with, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I was at the place when we were working. We were following some of the other churches, mainline churches. This happens to older people. I had something to say and I can't quite think of it. I'll let you know when I think of it again.
Just let me know.
Yeah.
One of the things I was really uncomfortable with some of the advocacy for leading the church, dare I say, was the arrogance of it. That how is it that we know where the church is going, for one, and for two, what happens to those in the church, our brothers and sisters, who are not at the same place that we are, and we are not in their place. So it felt arrogant to me. And I could imagine that's a little bit of the challenge that you might feel. Is people have high expectations that this is gonna show everybody what it is that the church needs to be. And I don't know that you've been given that. We weren't given that mandate. And I don't know if you've been given that mandate. What I hope came through in the 92 book was that, I'll say a little thing in a moment, but that everybody can find a place in it. That there are things about it that re-echo the tradition as we have received it and continue to live into it. And when you're looking really carefully, or maybe even not so carefully, you can see hints of a different kind of future. So that's how I think we came to terms with it. When it came to inclusive language, we finally, and we didn't follow this 100%, but we said anything that was written post 1970, I'd have to go back and look again. But at some point, 1970 or 1980, that we would assume certainly inclusive human language. That was became a non-negotiable. And more biblically grounded ways of talking about God that did not always default to father language or to specifically masculine ways of referring to God. And that things before that period that did have a kind of historical grounding, you were really helpful with this kind of historical grounding, that we would look at those much more carefully, but by and large, keep them as much intact as possible. And yeah, that was all, took a whole bunch of negotiation and things like that. So I'll offer this, and it is one of my blessings to you, is that there came a point after a really hard slog through, I don't know, some song, trying to figure out, should we put it in? And as we were discussing it, here are the people it's going to make mad, and here are the people who are going to be happy to see, and here are the people who will probably threaten not to buy the book because and these people will buy it in throngs because it will, and then you have this kind of middle ground. And somebody finally just said at some point, the way we should market this book is that it has something that promises to offend everyone. And there was a moment of great freedom when we finally said, well, yes, of course. Of course. Yeah, it is, because that's kind of what the reality of the church is and was, and I hope not ever shall be, but maybe it will. I don't know. Is this getting at what you...
Absolutely.
Does this ring true to you?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a little bit behind. I'm thinking about all these things I haven't thought about for a long time.
I know we haven't, Yeah.
But I think what struck me so was the difference, and this isn't a question of this group, I suppose, but the difference between thinking that we need to be able to absorb the King James Version as we were until 1955.
Exactly, yeah.
And then there was great confusion about it. We must not leave the King James Version. So that was part of our problem. And then I forget what I was going to say then.
Yeah, it'll come back. But but I think you're right in naming that because the assumptions about how we talk to God. I mean, whether it's these and thys and thous, or fathers and sons
Yeah.
and he's, this messes with people's piety.
Yes.
It messes at the core with how they are in relationship with God. Which is why I think we have to handle that very gently. That doesn't mean that it can't expand, but to realize that. So did you get, you would have been with the King James, that really would have been more about the kinds of things in the worship resources section.
I didn't mind changing some of those words, like bowels was the.
Yeah, right.
Had to do with the mercy.
Yeah.
And then
I
when the
said-
bowels move in
Yeah,
a
yeah, right.
Wesley hymn,
Yeah.
that throws the congregation in fits.
See? Yeah. But there it was.
Yeah, it was.
There it was.
And, but then we worked with the principle that we stay with the language of the times, just as we're able to understand Shakespeare. But people aren't.
Yeah.
They don't understand.
Yes.
But back in my time, more people did understand because of the King James Version. And so changes had a different meaning than they did
Yeah, exactly.
in the 90s.
But in the 69 book, there is with Let There Be Light, Lord, right? God
Yes.
and host. You changed one of those, right?
Well, no, we didn't change it. We went back to the original. That's
Oh.
what my job was, to go back to the original as much as possible. But it had said, let there be light.
It's about homes and,
May your homes be built with love and virtue filled. That's what it said. And I looked it up, and it didn't say that. It said love and laughter. And then I found the piece in 1864 by a Brenneman in Iowa about we should not laugh aloud. Christians ought not laugh aloud. And there it was yet.
exactly,
It was changed to virtue.
to virtues.
And so we had quite a discussion about what happens if we take the virtue out of that song.
And go back to the original.
Yes. But it was a big shock to go from what was mid 20th century approach,
Yeah.
taking things as the author said at his or her time,
Yeah.
and trying to bring it up to date.
Yeah. And there are several horrors that I am sorry that are in the 1992 book.
Why?
Not many, believe me.
Well, the psalm setting for da 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 da, and not the Advent one,
As the heart.
as the heart. Thank you. Full of all he's, and now they are God. And God. You just have this very harsh, guttural kind of thing running all the way through this otherwise rather lovely lilting tune. She's going to pull it up here. I think that was a really bad. That was a
As
really
a heart
bad.
with you eager
yearning. Yeah.
You would have kept stayed with male language? Male pronouns?
Yeah,
God appears too often.
It just
doesn't
appears too often. And the thing is that when you try to sing, even to say God, you got two really hard consonants right there, right in a row. And it just is all the time. It's just constantly. And he works a whole lot easier. It's just more euphonious. But that's one of those that I think is a sadness.
But one like he leadeth me, he leadeth me, he leadeth me. It goes over and over.
Yeah.
That could be
Yeah.
spared.
Of course, we'll notice that that's a gospel song too.
That's right.
I think of two hymns from 92 that were really very quickly took on a lot of energy, and it's partly from Wichita 95 and doing them there, but one was Veni Sancte Spiritus. The other was Harris Lowen's New Earth, Heaven's New. were those pretty radical or pretty new at the time of the new hymnal? And what led to their inclusion?
Well, Harris was there for one thing. But, we didn't put it in because of him, but we thought it was worthwhile.
It had also been in assembly songs, hadn't it?
It may have been.
The hymnal sampler, I remember.
Bethlehem 83, it was, that was.
I was thinking, I think
conferences.
I think it's in that collection, so we had an outing for
Yes.
it before. Go ahead.
I'm done. I mean, I forget.
Well,
Yeah,
but
so-
why did you include those two? Why?
Well, one is that Taizé was a new thing, and it introduced a style of prayer that was new to Mennonites. It was reaching for a less activist approach to some kind of things. And with music that had integrity, but also was built in a way that you could keep expanding and riffing on it. So this aleatory effect that was there that gave an opportunity for improvisation in some ways that had not really been there before. I can't speak for why Veni Sanctus did, but several of the other Taizé pieces also continued to go. New Earth, Heavens New, I mean, that's hard for me to say because that seemed almost old by the time we put it in, so that's a little harder for me to speak to. But I do, I mean, part of it is one of the contributions that Mennonites, I think, received from the Church of the Brethren in this project is a greater attention to the work of the Spirit. In their pietist background, and there would be from the pietist German, Russian Mennonite background coming there too, it can be there. But there's a kind of sense of spiritual warmth and closeness that's a little bit more available to Church of the Brethren people than has tended to be available to Mennonites, dominant culture Mennonites. So we were kind of somewhat informally, somewhat intentionally, looking for hymns related to the Holy Spirit that were accessible, were congregational, and the like. And Harris wrote in a more folk idiom, which was much more accepted.
Men and women.
Men and
He's
women.
Mennonite. There are so many winners
Yeah.
on that hymn.
Exactly. He wrote it while he was a seminary student here. And that's
Oh,
what-
an AMBS student. Well,
Yeah, there we go. He foregrounded it in chapel one time. It's like, yeah, cool. And then there were, of course, there were changes and things like that. But so it's hard for me to pull out just specifically about those two songs. But there was enough interest and enough people who had experience. We felt in the church that to put those in was not quite the risk. Plus, Veni Sanctus was in the hymnal sampler, right? And if New Earth, Heavens New, if it was in assembly songs, again, they had both had a bit of an alto. One of the things that happened is that we had this great opportunity for Mary to put together the hymnal sampler for Normal 89, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, and we by that point had all of the songs, except 606, that are in that book had been pretty much approved by. We were reasonably certain that all of those songs were on their way into the hymnal. A couple dropped out after that, but we were working with a body of hymns that was really emerging as being a big part of the new book. And now I have lost track of what I was going to say about that. Sorry for that digression, Mike. I can only look forward to when I'm 93. Yeah, go ahead.
What about the accounts about the Amish song, like from the Ausbund, number 33? Like, how did you decide to put that in, and what would be your counsel to us with that?
Yeah. Well, you actually brought that one a little bit, you kept bringing that into the project.
I wrote it out as Joseph Yoder had copied it, had notated it in Pennsylvania in the 30s. And as a young man around Goshen had done in circles, every note was a circle. He had done it. They had tried to notate. He'd been to school, and so they tried to notate. But criticism of that is, well, how does everybody know what to do?
Yeah, yeah.
And mostly, that's the way oral music is.
And I think at the time also is that there were still a significant number of people in the Mennonite church, maybe more in Pennsylvania, northern Indiana, whose heritage had been Amish.
Oh, yes, I went to a number of churches where,
Yeah.
where they would really sing out and almost weep
Yeah.
to sing the song.
Yeah, exactly. So part of it was, it's part of a tradition, we want to be clear. There are not that many hymns from the 16th century or things that we can draw from, as they basically are to be translated, from the Ausbund or things like that, because of meters and all kinds of other problems. But this was one that was representative of that collection. It wasn't part of the original collection, but it is part of that. It's representative of, as Mary says, some of the heritage of people for whom that song is deep in their heart. It's deep in their bodies. And to have the opportunity to see it and to have the opportunity to sing it. And for those of us for whom it's not, we get the advantage of the text from the one that's on the opposite page. We can see what they had drawn from excuse me, with that text. I remember what I was going to say about the hymnal sampler when I got diverted. And that is, once we experienced this at Normal 89 and there was opportunities to get feedback from people, the kind of resounding sense we had is, do more. You're headed in the right direction, keep moving in that direction, risk more. And that was a really helpful word. And that doesn't mean, upend all of the inclusive language, but just you're on the right path. So that with the 1992 book, I'm going to back up. One of the things the publishers are really worried about, rightly, because this is what it's their job to worry about, is whether there will be enough familiar in the new book that we created, that people will feel familiar enough that they're going to want to buy it, and then we'll explore new things. So in the process of putting the book together, we were not always thinking, oh, is this something that was in the Mennonite hymnal, or was this something that was in the Church of the Brethren hymnal? We just chose things. And when we got the collection all together and it's heading off to the publisher or the printers in the next 6 months or so, I went through and I counted up how many of the songs had been in earlier Brethren sources, whether they were Brethren hymnals or the Brethren songbook or the like, and how many things had been in Mennonite sources. I didn't look at the 27 hymnal, but the earlier, the one from 1902 was way more popular than 1927. Songs for the church, life songs, Sing and Rejoice, on and on and on. And when we got down to it, 25% of the 1990 book was familiar or would have been familiar from Brethren sources, and 30% from Mennonite sources. So when people said risk more, we did. And to my knowledge, Amy can probably give better information, to my knowledge, the fact that there was so much that would not have been automatically familiar did not turn out to be a problem in marketing the book. There were other reasons why people were somewhat slow to buy it. Either they couldn't afford it, or they really wanted to see were their key songs there or not. But the thing about familiarity with that particular collection didn't pan out in the ways that the publishers had been concerned about.
I agree, and I think in Sing the Journey, I've heard from several people. What's the classic hymn in Sing the Journey?
The love of God.
The love of God. I've heard from several people having that and Sing the Journey really helped that sell for the opposite reason, because then people were wanting some of those grounding points that weren't in.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. What's been interesting to me in some of those ways is that the love of God was not something that we spent a lot of time thinking about with Hymnal the Worship Book. In fact, before you left the project, I don't think we had really thought about that hymn at all.
I don't think so.
No, it just wasn't there. The one that was more agitation about was How Great Thou Art. And
But that was a matter of money.
it was a matter of money, and it was a matter of how Manna Music was charging for that book, for that song at that time.
And it wasn't theirs, really.
No, well, no, they claim it is, but anyway, so you get into the interesting things. But maybe the publishing house got a whole bunch of things, but people did not come back to me and say, where is How Great Thou Art? If it was missed for a very short period of time. And that was one of the places where we felt like we were taking a risk by not including it, that in the end didn't really pan out that way. It is in the 1969 book. And you paid $1,000 for it.
And that was more than we paid for the rest of the book.
Right, didn't you tell me that you had a budget of $3,000 for copyrights, and a third of the budget went for one song? And in the 92 book, all the other publishers had basically gone to a system of you're charged a certain amount per book, per whatever, and Manna Music had not gone there yet and just basically said, nope, this is what the price is. And any reprints, of course, would have been more, and we just, the other thing is that they insisted that the banner across the top had to be How Great Thou Art, and all of our convention had been to use the first line. And even though the Presbyterians had broken against that, we didn't know that we could afford a lawsuit if Manna Music decided to go after us. So we said, we don't need this song. We don't need it that much. We can sing it from memory, or we have it in the 1969 book, or there are other ways that we have access to it.
And that one's now administered by Hope.
Exactly, there you go.
So
When
we
did
can
that
be heroes
transfer
by
over?
bringing it back.
Huh?
We can be heroes and bring it back.
There you go. There you go.
I think this would be a good moment to get some refreshment and continue our conversations more informally, but thank you so much for this, what you've offered here.
Best wishes to all of you.
Indeed, yeah.
It's a great thing to do.
Yeah. It will affect the rest of your life.
It will.
Absolutely.